I had met Brent Scowcroft when he came out here to give a talk. And I was thought to be one of the better young Soviet specialists in the country. And I asked him a question. He came up to me afterwards and he said, I'd like to keep in touch. And he started taking me to something called the Aspen Strategy Group, where a lot of the foreign policy elite sort of gathers in the summer. And then when he was asked to be National Security Advisor by George H.W. Bush, he called me and he said, this fellow Gorbachev he's doing some really amazing things and interesting things. The president needs somebody to help him sort it out. Would you come be the White House Soviet specialist? Just to show you how different things were then. When I said, yes, Brent, I'd love to do that, he said, great. And then he said, are you a Republican? And I said, yes, but he didn't even know. I mean, that just shows how different things were not that long ago. He was just trying to find a bright young Soviet specialist, and he didn't really care about the politics. So I showed up in January of 1989, and within weeks it was obvious that the world that we knew was coming unstuck. It started in Poland with Solidarity making a deal with the government, and soon communist regimes were just kind of falling all over Eastern Europe. Everybody thought maybe Poland, Hungary, the Czechoslovakia would get out of the Soviet bloc because it was clear Gorbachev wasn't prepared to use force to keep them in. But would the Soviet Union really allow Germany to unify? As it was clear that East Germany could no longer sustain itself, we thought we'd better put some kind of process around it. And Brent came to call me over to his office and he said, I want you to be the White House representative on the political director's delegation that will actually write the document. And I said, Brent, I'm your Soviet specialist. And he said, for us, German unification is a Soviet problem. It's not an issue for us, but how we bring the Soviets along, that's going to be the big issue, so that we don't have an explosion in the middle of Europe. And that, for me, was the most exciting thing that I did in government, was to be on that political director's delegation to write the document on the unification of Germany.
Were you tempted to stay in government?
I felt that I couldn't, as an academic, 2 years was about right. At that stage in my career, I left in April and came back, and the coup against Gorbachev was in August, so I was not there for any of that. But I felt I'd done what I needed to do, and I'm an academic at heart. When I left the last time, people kept saying, well, what are you going to do? I'm going to go back to Stanford. It never occurred to me to do anything else.
Actually, I'd like to talk about your second round of public service.
Yes, it wasn't that big a step to become National Security Advisor, because I had been on the NSC staff in a senior role, and during the most extraordinary times, the end of the Cold War, and I'd managed the most important account. And I also had managed George W. Bush's foreign policy during the campaign, so I knew him well. So that was fine. And then, having been National Security Advisor, it was not that big a leap actually to Secretary of State. So the jobs, my government experience sort of added up properly for those jobs. But probably the hardest part about it was that when I became National Security Advisor, it was a little bit like being provost. When I was provost, I remember that the physics department wanted to buy a $17 million telescope. I remember when they sent the 3 Nobel laureates to sell me on the idea, thinking, okay, I'm obviously not going to debate the physics with them, but I'm the one who has to make the decision. So I had to learn to ask the right questions, and I had to learn what arguments I trusted and which ones I didn't in order to make a decision. So when you're National Security Advisor, you don't have deep knowledge about every area of the world, but you have to learn how to ask the right questions, whose arguments you can trust, and ultimately you have to make a decision. And that's hard for an academic, because we pride ourselves on knowing one thing in greater depth than anybody else. I once knew more about the Soviet General Staff than they knew about themselves. So you have to have this hunger to know something in great depth to be a great academic. When you're in a position of leadership like that, you aren't going to possibly know everything in depth. And so you have to get out of your comfort zone a bit and learn how to trust your instincts, how to gather information, how to make decisions. So that was, for me, the hardest part. This place is incredibly special, and I'm glad you're doing the oral histories, because I think universities in general are wonderful because they're intergenerational. You've got the bright young 18-year-old, and you've got the 60-year-old Nobel laureate, and they're in the same space, and wonderful things happen when they are.
The world needs those who truly believe in our common humanity and understand and affirm the universal longing for freedom. Die Luft der Freiheit weht. The wind of freedom blows. This is Stanford's motto, and a new reality in many places long stifled by tyranny. You will find ways to serve purposes greater than yourself, through public service, through politics, through protest. But never forget the habits of mind that you have learned here. And now, with freedom's wind at your back, may you find personal fulfillment and strength in the days ahead. God bless this class of 2002, today and throughout the rest of your lives. Thank you very much.